Welcome to Science Cafe Concord. My name is Dan Marchek. I'm one of the co-founders of Science Cafe. And how many of you have not been to a Science Cafe before? Wow. So, okay, I'll give you a little explanation. Science Cafe is about a discussion. It's not about a lecture. So what we'll do is ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll throw it open to the floor for questions. So David and I will have microphones. Please wait for a microphone so we can get it captured on the recording.
I'm not sure if Dan even introduced himself. Dan Marchecki and Sarah Eck of Hopkinton started this just because I think they wanted something to do in a weeknight, and they were tired of karaoke. And they wrote me in, and I said, this is a great idea. It'll last 3 months, and then it'll fizzle out. And as he said, that was 5 years ago. And we have one more session here in Concord before we take a break for the summer. In a month from now, the first Tuesday in June, is going to be the Science of Beer and Brewing, which... And we scheduled that because we weren't sure what the turnout would be in Concord, and we said, well, we'll end the session with something that'll draw a lot of people, but I don't know what we're going to do. I guess we're going to open that up for it. The topic tonight is Lyme disease. Obviously, it's a serious topic, but as I believe I said in the column, we try to keep things relatively light, to some extent here anyway. And we have two panelists. A third panelist, unfortunately, couldn't make it at the last minute. But two is fine because these are charming fellows. And so we have Dr. Lynn Durand, who's with Family Tree Healthcare. I can't read my own writing. Yep. Indeed, who has been dealing with Lyme disease for a number of years. And we have Alan Eaton, who is the state entomologist and with Cooperative Extension and has been the go-to bug guy for journalists for many years.
I am an entomologist with UNH Cooperative Extension, but I'm not the state entomologist. Is she here tonight? I guess not.
The unofficial state, no, never mind. Anyway, all right. Who has been misidentified in many news stories. All right. So these are two guys, and to say, I'm going to actually ask the first question, and after that, it's up to you, and so you have to ask things, or else we'll sit here in awkward silence. All right. So my first question is a rather simple one, which is, what exactly is Lyme disease? What exactly is Lyme disease? And before you answer that, I should have asked you, tell us for 2 minutes why we should pay any attention to you. What your background is.
Why we should?
Yeah, who you are.
Is my wife here? Can we talk to her about that? My name's Lynn Durand. I'm a physician, a family doctor. I've been in town here for 28 years. And about, let me see, about 15 years or so ago, maybe longer than that, I got interested in looking at chronic fatigue syndrome and chronic fatiguing illnesses. And in the long list of causes of chronic fatiguing illnesses is chronic infections, and in the list of infections, one is Lyme disease. So I learned a bit about Lyme and how to appropriately see it and diagnose it. And at that point, there was a Lyme specialist toward the seacoast that I was sending patients to, but then he ended up leaving practice, and so I found that telling somebody I think that a portion or a large part of their fatigue is due to Lyme disease and there's nobody to treat it, I didn't find satisfactory. So I ended up starting to do that. So I started treating Lyme disease. Excuse me, it's not that I'm sick and putting germs on everybody. I have an allergy, apologize. I started treating Lyme disease at that point, trying to be very quiet about it because it's so controversial. But then it just sort of started to expand and expand as word got out that there was somebody who would treat Lyme disease. So now my practice is about 80% Lyme disease. So it's just quite, and despite that, I have a 6 to 8 month waiting list for new people. It's just completely, the supply and demand is completely unequal. So the question of Lyme disease, what is Lyme disease? Everything about Lyme disease is incredibly controversial. So even that, what seems like a simple question, is completely controversial. The conventional answer would be it's a simple disease transmitted by a deer tick, although I know I'm supposed to say black-legged tick.
Yes, yes.
The Bambi Society would say we should say black-legged tick, transmitted by a black-legged tick, and the conventional people would say easy to recognize, easy to diagnose, easy to treat with short-term antibiotics, and does not cause long-term symptoms. And on the other side is the point of view that Lyme disease is very common. It is often very hard to recognize, that the testing is quite inaccurate, often misses it, and that it can become a very, very long and protracted illness that is very, very difficult to treat and can give such a wide constellation of symptoms that it's just phenomenal.
All right. And would you like to tell us why we should pay attention to you, even though you're not the state entomologist?
I'm Alan Eaton. I'm an entomologist with UNH Cooperative Extension. Extension is the outreach branch of your university, so our job in Extension is to help people solve problems and get information into their hands to help them solve problems, and that's why I got into working on ticks, because I was hired here to do pest management work in agricultural crops, and after only a few years it was very obvious that there was a big thing that was picking up called Lyme disease, and the tick that spreads this was increasingly reported and more common, and we had no publication covering it and its biology and so forth in our state. So that's one of the first things I did, and I aimed to fix that condition. And so I've been working on ticks now since 1988 or 89. So eventually I'll get the hang of it.
So how about a question? Oh, you wanted to ask a question.
Alan, could you tell us what the frequency of ticks that are infected with Lyme is in the areas and counties in New Hampshire?
Those data have been collected by the Division of Health and Human Services over a number of years, and it ranges from something on the order of 45 to 65 or 70% of the adults of black-legged tick have the Lyme disease spirochete, at least in the studies that I've seen. We're aiming to fix that with new data, but that's the range. Of course, that's the adults, but most people get Lyme disease from the nymphs, the younger stage, and of course the nymphs have only had one feeding opportunity to pick up the spirochete, so the incidence rate of the nymphs is about half that. So that's kind of worrisomely, is that a word, worrisomely high?
So the last studies that I had seen were 40 to 60%, but that was about 6 years ago. Do we have documentation that it's been rising since then?
In the stuff that I did, the data that we had was compatible with that range. And in order to really get the information, we'd have to throw a lot of money at it, which I don't think has been done. It might be an interesting question to ask, but it seems to still be in the ballpark, and that's the case. Once it builds up to a certain level, it seems to stay there and for a long time.
Dr. Durand, have you found that low-dose naltrexone is helpful in the treatment of Lyme disease?
Wow. Not the question I expected first. First of all, low-dose naltrexone, these days, drug abuse and narcotic use is very, very big in the news. So you have heard about naltrexone as the drug that we're talking about people being able to go to the drugstore and get without a prescription in order to reverse a narcotic overdose. So that's naltrexone that you would get in the injectable 50 milligram form. It was figured out just by serendipity more than 10 years ago that low-dose naltrexone, that is in the 1, 2, 3, 4 milligram range, given orally or transdermally at nighttime in certain conditions can have some beneficial effect. It seems to be in particular some that have some autoimmune type mechanism behind the disease, and Lyme disease does have some of that. So yes, sometimes low-dose naltrexone can be beneficial in Lyme.
I think we need to kind of start talking about what is the spirochete and why is it causing such an insidious and strange reaction in people? The entomologist.
I'll let Lynn answer that one.
Borrelia burgdorferi is the name of the germ. It is a spirochete. It's closely, it's similar in a lot of ways to the spirochete of syphilis. 100 years ago, syphilis, the phrase in medical schools was, if you know syphilis, you know medicine, because syphilis had such a completely wide range of symptoms that in order to be a syphilologist, you had to basically know most all fields of medicine. And this bacteria is similar to that in a whole lot of ways. It has a lot of characteristics which is very unusual compared to many other bacteria. In most of its forms, it reproduces very, very slowly. A streptococcal germ will reproduce in an hour or two. So in a day, you have 12 doublings. Whereas in some stages, the spirochete can go many, many days without reproducing. That's highly relative to the treatment because most antibiotics affect the organism during its replication phase. So if it's replicating once every several days or week, let's say, then a short term of antibiotic is only maybe going to get 1 or 2 chances to affect the organism, whereas if it's something that replicated 12 times in a day, then one day had 12 chances to get at it. It's an organism that takes several different forms in the body. It hides inside of cells, it hides inside of cartilage cells, it hides inside of eyes, it hides inside of some blood cells. So therefore, when it's in those places, they're called immuno-privileged areas. In other words, the white blood cells can't get to those places to try to get the bug. There are these things called, I just forgot, there's these little balls of DNA that hold small individual circular genes that a lot of times relate to antibiotic resistance. And most bacteria might have 1 or 2 or 3. The second most, as far as number of these in a bacteria, is chlamydia with about 7, but Lyme has about 20 or 21. It has all sorts of built-in resistance to antibiotics. It's an extremely unique bacteria. It's very, very difficult to culture. Most bugs, we have a urinary tract infection. You plate the urine on a culture plate and put it, and you can shortly grow the bug in the laboratory. We've never figured out how to culture syphilis, and it's very, very few labs that have been able to culture this organism because its conditions are so fastidious as far as its living conditions. So it's a very, very unique organism.
Your article stated that although we have not had a cold winter to kill the bugs, we have had a dry spring, which has obviously recently changed. So are there less ticks or more ticks?
Where in the state are you?
Concord.
And the situation is that the drought to which I referred was last year, and it was extended over much of the state, but parts of the lakes region and farther north weren't as heavily affected by the drought. So that was when the nymphs that are now adults, the lucky ones, survived. So the nymphs was around last year in the drought, and they don't survive drought conditions really well. And as a result, we had a fair amount of mortality in that stage, so that meant there were fewer adults in the fall. And then, of course, these are the same adults in the spring we're just getting the very last ones of them active now. And then pretty soon they'll stop and die out. So it was last year's drought, but then the dryness also affects the activity of these things. So when it gets too dry, they drop down into the leaf litter or into the soil to rehydrate, and they stop questing for hosts. So we had that occur earlier. And then when we had some rain 10 or 12 days ago or so, something like that, we got a flush of activity with black-legged tick, and it happened to be about the same time that American dog tick started being active. So we had a real pickup in our area, and I think the same was true here with the limited checking I did.
Can you explain questing?
Think of Don Quixote. And so Don Quixote with 8 legs, maybe. So when something is questing, the tick is sitting, a graphic demonstration. So it's sitting holding on with its rear legs, and with its front legs all hanging out, waiting for you to touch it. So that means it's behaviorally waiting for a host, and when that host touches it, it will grab on. So only a certain percentage of the population is in questing mode at any one time. Some of them are too dry and they're rehydrating or something else. So as a result, not all of them are doing this at any one particular time. So questing is actively waiting for a host, and you have to come into contact with that tick, you or your clothing or your fur or feathers, in order for the ticks to find you and climb aboard.
So I've heard people say, well, the ticks are dropping out of the trees and jumping on them and stuff. What's your thought about that?
I'll use a scientific term here. Hogwash. I have seen them in trees. The times I've seen them in trees, they were about that high off the ground, so at the very base of the tree. And we have one species that specializes in squirrels, and that you would find in cavities within trees. But other than that, the vast majority of our ticks you won't find in trees, because the biggest mortality factor for ticks is drying out. And up in a tree, you are really exposed to the air moving and so forth, and they don't want to be there. Or if they're the ones that try it, they croak because they dry out too quickly. And so as a result, they're down in the thick grass, the tall grass, the thick brush and so forth, where the humidity is high for many hours each day. Think of yourself going through a hayfield that hasn't been mowed yet on July 4th. It's 90 degrees, but you walk through and you're absolutely soaked with dew almost up to your waist, even if it's 10 in the morning. So it's been hours and hours that humidity has stayed high. That's the situation they need to be able to rehydrate each day to stay active. And if they don't have that, they don't do well. So around here anyway, we don't find ticks there unless my students have glued them there.
So when people have a tick bite in their head or something, and their thought is, well, it fell out of a tree, it actually just climbed up there from the grass.
I know, this is David, I know a number of years ago there was somebody at UNH, grad students, that were working on a program to use satellite data about humidity and sunshine, and with the idea of eventually having daily tick forecasts. I don't think anything ever came of it, but it was an interesting idea and very much reflected on what you just said.
In the complex systems group, and some of the work is still going on, and I haven't seen a recent publication, so I'm waiting to hear as well. You can imagine from the complexity of that kind of statement how difficult it is to come up with something like that, and so they may be part of the way there, but I don't have anything to report. I don't know.
To go with the daily pollen count and the traffic and all that, you know.
So a question is relative to the tick survival in the wintertime. What about the survival of the main host vectors, the white-footed mouse and the white-tailed deer, how they survived the winter and how that's going to affect this season's tick population?
And my guess is that the white-footed mice are much more resilient than the ticks are, and so they were able to get through the winter. We do find that there's been research in states to our south, and my brain is trying to remember which states they were where the work was done. I'm thinking New York and New Jersey, where they demonstrated a cyclical pattern that related to the amount of mast, the amount of acorns and other hard mast. And when there was a good acorn year, that meant it was a good year for the mice. And then so a certain number of months, I think it was 6 months or a year later, the tick population was higher. And it went up and down according to the mast yield. So if we had somebody out there that was measuring the mouse population, is anybody here doing that tonight? If they were, we might have a better answer, but I'm guessing that they're fairly resilient, and probably it hasn't been a factor, but that's just a guess.
Yeah, so oak tree masting, so about every 7 or 8 years-ish, if you might see underneath oak trees just what seems like a huge amount of acorns, and that's an oak tree masting. I think that we don't really know why they do it every couple years, but then the mice have very lot of food supply over the winter. So then the next year you get more nymphs, and the following year more adults.
Yep.
So the question of how we can still go out and enjoy the wild and avoid ticks, and can I just say before I do that quickly, is one of the most popular stories I've ever written was about a guy who's doing research to develop an autonomous robot that crawls around. It blows carbon dioxide out carbon dioxide out the front to attract ticks, and then drags behind it a permethrin rag to kill them, and it trundles around your wall and around your yard all day. And after I wrote it, I had these people besieging me with emails and phone calls. Where can I buy one of these things? The guy's still developing it anyway. So assuming we don't have one of those, what should we do to go out and enjoy the wild and be less worried about this issue that we've whipped ourselves up into a frenzy of despair tonight?
I think the number one, the most important thing is actually, if we did a top 10 list, it'd be numbers 1, 2, and 3. Check yourself for ticks every day during tick season. It trumps everything else. There's all kinds of other things you can do about the clothing you wear, and I'll go over some of those, but I check myself every day during tick season. And I started doing this in March. Tick season starts in March, and we're about to enter the riskiest time of year, which starts in about the 12th or so of this month. And then June is the peak of the risk. So that's the one thing you can do that has the best chance of reducing your risk. And if you get into a regular pattern, that can be extremely helpful. I also, and Lynn wants to.
I'd like to comment on that. Anybody country music fans?
Oh, yes.
Who is the singer? There's
Yeah.
Travis, somebody. Travis. There's a country song. Look at it on YouTube. It's called "I Want to Do a Tick Check on You." So, tick checks can be okay. You can do it together.
I'm glad it was Lynn that said that and not me. Several other things you can do. I wear tall boots, rubber boots, 16 inches high. They're too slippery. Most of the ticks you encounter are down around your ankles. And so that's one thing that I do. You can use repellents. You can use gaiters to help, or tuck your pant legs in to help keep the ticks on the outside of your clothing. Stay out of tick-prone areas. When we get into the June, I don't sample ticks anymore in June. It's too dangerous for me. I live alone. There's nobody to help me search. So I don't do that then. That's one of the things that I do. So you can change your behavior. Clothing can affect what you do. There's permethrin-treated clothing that you can get, and it's available. You can buy the pressurized cans of the stuff and treat it yourself. So there's a number of things you can do that can affect your risk, as well as modifying the habitat you're in, mowing, pruning, things like that, moving play equipment away from the woods edges. There's a bunch of things you can do, and you control a lot of that risk. And a lot of what I do, and a lot of what I put on the website that I've got, and I've got the URL here if you want to have copies of this, is to help you to empower you to the kinds of things you can do to reduce your risk so we can get out and enjoy this wonderful place. So there's a bunch of things you can do. I could go on a long time, David, but those are the biggies that I think of, and the tick check is number one. I slow down in my checks beginning about mid-July, and I kind of don't do much in August. But then October 1, start them up again because the adults are back being active.
And very quickly, can you describe what is, where do you find ticks? So deep woods, no?
Thick brush, tall grass, those are the places that are the biggest places to find them because, of course, drying out is the mortality factor that kills most ticks, drying out. So they need thick brush, tall grass, that's where they're going to be. And for black-legged tick, the brushy stuff more than the grassy stuff. For American dog tick, grassy more than brushy, but they're in both situations.
And you and I talked very briefly about methods to control actually the mice around your house that'll drop it in the yard by trying to basically get the medicine on the mouse.
And I cover those in my publication. There's tick boxes, as they call them, that are designed to that has bait boxes. The mice go in and rub against a wick that's impregnated with the fipronil. That's one of the techniques. There's the pesticide-treated cotton balls you distribute. That's designed to do kind of the same thing. Those are covered in my publication. You can also use pesticides if you wish. If you apply pesticides properly, one proper treatment a year, one proper treatment a year done at the right time dramatically lowers the tick population. And there's details in the publication. Do you want a spray that's okay for certified organic places? There's some of those as well. So there's a bunch of information. I could go on a long time, but I put it in the publication, in the videos, and it's on the website. If you want to get one of these, they're, what, $10? Are we?
All right.
Please.
Please.
Tick removal. So Alan has a couple of tick removal things here. There's a lot that have these little V-shaped thing for getting up under the tick and raising it. Personally, I really have a favorite. I don't get any kickback on it, but there's something called Tick Twister, tick-twister.com. And it is so cool. It has the little V like that, but it's on the end of it looks like a hose sort of, and you put it underneath the tick, and then you spin the thing, and it's incredible. The tick has these barbs and glue holding its mouth parts in. You spin this thing around, and then it just comes. You're not tenting up the skin to pull it out. It just comes out. It's so cute. So I think I just love to have, I want to carry the tick twister with me, and rather than squeezing with your fingers, and then you squeeze all of its stuff back into you.
Actually, it's funny you mention that because I got a call today because of the column in the Monitor from a 90-year-old. He couldn't make it. He can't drive after dark, but he'd been in the woods all his life, and he talked about you twist it once clockwise and once counterclockwise, and you can just screw that guy right out of your skin. So, sounds like it.
And it varies a little bit with the species and the stage. So there's some where that technique may work better than others, and I haven't had enough chances to try it myself. We'll see. But when I was a kid, I was taught touch a hot match to the tick and make it how many were told that? Slather it with Vaseline to make it suffocate. How many were told that too? Yeah. Please don't do either one. We really want you to use the tick spoon or the forceps or something like that. Grab it as close to the head as possible and remove it. I don't know if the studies have been done, but we worry that if you squeeze it or touch a hot match to it, it will inject you with more saliva and spirochetes and therefore increase your chance of a problem rather than just, and so I talk about that and some other things.
So please join me in thanking our fantastic panel. And our moderator, David Brooks. All right.